The leather-bound journal fell from the dusty shelf with a sound that would change my life forever, because inside, written in my nursemaid's familiar handwriting, was the name of a daughter I never knew existed. My name is Lord Edmund Ashford, 23 years old, heir to the Ravenhall estate that has been in my family for 8 generations. I had returned from Cambridge only 3 days prior, my head still swimming with philosophy and mathematics, when I decided to explore the grand library that I had somehow neglected during my childhood. Perhaps it was the crisp November morning, with golden light streaming through the tall diamond-paned windows, that drew me to this sanctuary of knowledge that my grandfather had built with such pride. The library at Ravenhall was magnificent, mahogany shelves reaching toward the coffered ceiling, Persian rugs covering the polished oak floors, and thousands of volumes that seemed to hold the wisdom of centuries. I had always preferred the outdoors as a boy, much to my father's disappointment, but something about returning home had awakened a hunger for the written word that I couldn't quite explain. I was reaching for a volume of Voltaire when the accident happened. My elbow caught another book, and as I tried to catch it, an entire section came tumbling down. Books scattered across the floor like fallen leaves, and I muttered a curse that would have earned me a sharp rebuke from Martha, had she still been alive to hear it. Martha. Even now, 6 months after her passing, the thought of my beloved nursemaid brought both warmth and an ache to my chest. She had raised me from the age of 5, when my mother died of consumption, giving me more love and guidance than many children receive from their own parents. My father, Lord Henry Ashford, was a good man but distant, consumed with the duties of managing our vast estate and our family's position in society. It was Martha who had dried my tears, celebrated my victories, and shaped the man I had become. As I knelt to gather the scattered books, my fingers closed around a slim journal I had never seen before. The leather was worn soft with age, and when I opened it, I immediately recognized Martha's careful handwriting. My heart began to race as I realized what I had found, her private diary, hidden away behind the other volumes like a secret too precious to share. The first entries were simple records of household duties, but as I turned the pages, my hands trembling slightly, I discovered something that made my breath catch in my throat. There, written in Martha's distinctive script, was a name that would haunt me. My dearest Lily, may God forgive me for what I have done to protect you. Lily. Martha had a daughter named Lily, and I had never known she existed. I sank into the leather armchair by the fireplace, the journal clutched against my chest, trying to make sense of this revelation. How could Martha have hidden such an enormous part of her life from me? We had been so close, sharing everything from my childhood fears to my dreams for the future. Yet she had carried the secret, the existence of her own child, for all these years. With trembling fingers, I continued reading. The entries revealed a story that broke my heart and filled me with a rage I had never experienced. Martha had been dismissed from her previous position when it was discovered she was with child. The father, she wrote, was a gentleman who refused to acknowledge his responsibility, leaving her alone and disgraced. She had found refuge at Ravenhall when my father hired her, but only by pretending to be a widow and leaving her infant daughter in the care of her sister in a distant village. I visit her when I can. One entry read. But I dare not bring her here. Lord Henry is kind, but he would never accept a servant with a bastard child. I send what money I can spare and pray that someday I will be able to claim her openly as my own. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. All those times Martha had seemed melancholy, all those unexplained absences when she claimed to be visiting distant relatives, she had been going to see her daughter. Her secret daughter, who had grown up without a mother's daily love because of society's cruel judgments. I turned the page and found an entry dated just 2 months before Martha's death. Lily is now 21 and has been given a position as assistant to Mr. Whitmore in the library at Ravenhall. Lord Henry does not know of our connection, and I have sworn her to secrecy. She is beautiful and intelligent, everything I hoped she would become. She thinks I am merely a kind servant who took interest in her education. Perhaps it is better this way. Perhaps she will have opportunities that knowing the truth would deny her. My hands were shaking now as the full weight of this revelation hit me. Martha's daughter, this Lily, was here, at Ravenhall, working in the very library where I now sat. She had been here for months, and I had been away at Cambridge, completely unaware that the child of the woman who raised me was walking these same halls. I thought back to my arrival 3 days ago, trying to remember if I had seen anyone new among the staff. There had been a young woman I didn't recognize speaking with Mr. Whitmore near the servants' entrance, but I had paid little attention. My father often hired new staff, and I rarely involved myself in such matters. But now, knowing what I knew, I felt ashamed of my indifference. Standing abruptly, I walked to the window and stared out at the grounds that would someday be mine. The autumn landscape was painted in shades of gold and crimson, beautiful but somehow melancholy. How many secrets did these walls hold? How many stories of love and loss, sacrifice and sorrow, had played out within the boundaries of this estate? I needed to find her. I needed to find Lily and somehow make amends for the injustice that had been done to both her and Martha. But what could I possibly say? How do you approach someone with the news that the servant who showed kindness to them was actually their mother, and that you are the son of the household that forced that separation? The sound of footsteps in the corridor outside made me quickly close the journal and slip it inside my coat. I had no idea who might be approaching, but instinct told me that this knowledge was dangerous. If my father learned that he had unknowingly employed both a woman and her illegitimate daughter, there would be consequences that I couldn't bear to imagine. "Master Edmund?" came a voice from the doorway. It was Mr. Whitmore, the elderly librarian who had served our family for over 30 years. His kind eyes took in the scattered books on the floor, and his weathered face creased with concern. I heard a commotion. "Is everything quite all right?" "Perfectly fine, Whitmore," I replied, forcing my voice to sound steady. "I was simply clumsy with the books. I apologize for the mess." He stepped into the room, moving with the careful grace of a man who had spent his life surrounded by precious volumes. "Think nothing of it, my lord. Perhaps I might assist you in finding something specific? The library can be overwhelming, even for those of us who know it well." This was my opportunity, and I seized it with a casualness that belied my racing heart. "Actually, I was wondering about your new assistant. My father mentioned hiring additional help for the library." Mr. Whitmore's face brightened immediately. "Ah yes, Miss Lily Thornwick. A remarkable young woman, truly. She has a natural affinity for books and an education that rivals many gentlemen of my acquaintance. She has been invaluable in cataloging the new acquisitions from your grandfather's estate." Thornwick. So that was the surname she had taken, probably her aunt's name. But hearing Mr. Whitmore speak of her with such obvious respect and admiration made my chest tight with an emotion I couldn't name. Pride, perhaps, that Martha's daughter had turned out so well, or anger that she had been forced to hide her true identity. "She sounds like exactly what the library needed," I managed to say. "I should very much like to meet her and express my appreciation for her work. I believe she is in the East Wing today, working on the historical documents section. Shall I fetch her?" "No," I said quickly, perhaps too quickly, because Mr. Whitmore raised an eyebrow at my tone. "That is, I don't wish to interrupt her work. I'll simply introduce myself when our paths cross naturally." He nodded approvingly. "Very considerate of you, my lord. Miss Thornwick is quite dedicated to her duties. She arrives before dawn most mornings and often works well past the dinner hour. Reminds me of myself at her age, though I dare say she has a far quicker mind for organization than I ever possessed." After Mr. Whitmore departed, I spent the remainder of the morning in a state of nervous anticipation that was entirely foreign to me. I had faced examinations at Cambridge, delivered speeches before the university's most distinguished professors, and even confronted a charging board during a hunting expedition, but the prospect of meeting Martha's daughter filled me with an anxiety that bordered on panic. What would she look like? Would I see Martha in her features, in the way she moved or spoke? And more importantly, how would I explain my interest without revealing the secret that could destroy her position here? By afternoon, I could no longer contain my curiosity. I made my way to the East Wing, my footsteps echoing softly on the polished stone floors. The historical documents section was housed in a smaller chamber off the main library, with lower ceilings and windows that faced the kitchen gardens. As I approached, I could hear the soft rustle of papers and the scratch of a quill on parchment. I paused at the doorway, and my breath caught in my throat. There, seated at a wooden desk with her back to me, was a young woman with hair the color of burnished copper, caught up in a simple but elegant arrangement that allowed a few wayward curls to frame her neck. She wore a dress of deep blue wool, modest but well-fitted, and as she worked, she hummed a melody so softly that I had to strain to hear it. It was a tune Martha used to sing to me when I was frightened by thunderstorms, and hearing it now, from the lips of her daughter, nearly brought me to my knees. "Miss Thornwick?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She turned, and I found myself looking into eyes the exact shade of Martha's, warm brown with flecks of gold that seemed to catch the light. Her face was heart-shaped with high cheekbones and a determined chin, and when she saw me standing there, her expression shifted from surprise to something that might have been recognition, though that was impossible. "My lord," she said, rising quickly and dropping into a perfect curtsy. Forgive me, I didn't hear you approach. How may I be of service? Her voice was cultured, with only the faintest trace of a regional accent that I couldn't quite place. Whatever education she had received had been thorough, and I found myself wondering who had paid for it, who had cared enough about Martha's illegitimate daughter to ensure she could speak and carry herself like a lady. Please don't stand on ceremony, I said, stepping into the room. I wanted to introduce myself and welcome you to Ravenhall. I understand you've been doing excellent work here. She remained standing, her hands clasped before her, but I caught a flicker of something in her eyes, perhaps curiosity about why the heir to the estate would seek her out personally. You're very kind, my lord. Mr. Whitmore has been an excellent teacher, and the collection here is extraordinary. I feel quite privileged to work with such treasures. As she spoke, I found myself studying her features, searching for traces of Martha in the curve of her smile, the way she tilted her head when listening. The resemblance was there, but subtle. She was taller than Martha had been, with a more delicate build, and there was something in her bearing that spoke of hidden strength. You have an excellent grasp of historical documentation, I observed, glancing at the papers spread across her desk. This appears to be correspondence from the Tudor period. Quite complex material. A genuine smile crossed her face for the first time, transforming her features completely. Henry VIII's dissolution of the monasteries created a great deal of paperwork, as you might imagine. These letters detail the transfer of monastic lands to private ownership. Fascinating from a historical perspective, though rather tragic for the displaced monks. Her intelligence was immediately apparent, but more than that, there was a compassion in her observation about the monks that reminded me so strongly of Martha that I had to look away for a moment. Martha had always seen the human cost of grand historical events, always worried about the forgotten people caught in the wake of powerful men's decisions. You speak as if you've had formal education in history, I said, settling into a chair across from her desk without invitation. She looked momentarily startled by my casual behavior, but sat back down at my gesture. A shadow crossed her face, so briefly that I might have imagined it. I was fortunate enough to receive instruction from a retired schoolmaster in my village. He believed that knowledge should not be the exclusive province of gentlemen. There was something in the way she said it that made me suspect there was more to the story, but I didn't press. Instead, I found myself asking, "What village was that?" "Little Whitmore, my lord. About 40 miles north of here." She paused, then added, "My aunt raised me there after my parents died when I was an infant." The lie came so smoothly that I almost believed she had convinced herself it was true. But Martha's journal had told a different story. Lily knew exactly who her mother was, knew that Martha was not just a kind servant, but the woman who had given her life and then sacrificed everything to protect her. "I'm sorry for your loss," I said softly. "To lose one's parents so young must have been difficult." Something flickered in her eyes, pain, perhaps, or guilt at the deception she was forced to maintain. "My aunt was very good to me. She ensured I wanted for nothing." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, and I found myself studying the way the afternoon light caught the red highlights in her hair, the graceful way her hands rested on the desk. There was something about her presence that was both calming and electrifying, as if being near her made the world seem more vivid somehow. "Might I ask how you came to hear of the position here?" I said, though I suspected I knew the answer. "A woman named Martha recommended me to your father. She said she had heard of my situation and thought I might be suitable for library work." Again, the careful half-truth, delivered with practiced ease. Hearing her speak Martha's name so casually, as if she were just another servant who had shown kindness to a stranger, made my chest tight with suppressed emotion. How it must have hurt Martha to maintain such distance from her own daughter, to be spoken of as merely a helpful acquaintance rather than the mother who had sacrificed everything for her child's future. "Martha was a remarkable woman," I said quietly. "She helped raise me after my mother died. Her passing was a great loss to our household." Lily's composure cracked slightly, and I saw her swallow hard before responding. "Yes, I heard she had died. She seemed very kind in our brief acquaintance. I'm sorry for your loss as well, my lord." The careful way she spoke, the slight tremor in her voice, told me everything I needed to know. She was grieving too, grieving the loss of a mother she couldn't openly claim, mourning in secret just as I was mourning the woman who had been more of a parent to me than my own father. "She was," I agreed. "She had a way of seeing the best in people, of believing they could rise above their circumstances." Lily looked up at me sharply, and for a moment, I thought she might say something, might acknowledge the deeper meaning in my words. But then her training in discretion reasserted itself, and she simply nodded. "That's a rare quality," she said. "The world needs more people like that." I wanted to tell her then, wanted to reveal that I knew who she was, that Martha had spoken of her daughter with such love and pride in her private moments. But something held me back, perhaps the knowledge that such a revelation could destroy the life she had carefully built here, or perhaps the growing realization that what I was feeling for her was far more complicated than simple compassion for Martha's hidden child. Because as I sat there in that small room, watching the way she moved her hands when she spoke, listening to the musical quality of her voice, I was beginning to understand that Lily Thornwick was not just the daughter of my beloved nursemaid. She was a woman of extraordinary grace and intelligence, and despite the vast social gulf between us, despite the impossibility of what I was thinking, I was falling under her spell. If you've ever felt a connection that defied all logic and explanation, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because what happened next would test everything I thought I knew about love, duty, and the courage required to follow one's heart. Over the following weeks, I found myself drawn to the library with increasing frequency. What began as casual visits to check on the historical documents became daily conversations that stretched far longer than propriety should have allowed. Lily possessed a mind that challenged my own, discussing everything from philosophical treatises to agricultural innovations with an insight that would have impressed my Cambridge professors. We discovered a shared love of poetry, particularly the works of Alexander Pope and John Dryden. She had memorized entire passages from The Rape of the Lock, and could recite them with such feeling that I found myself hanging on every word, not for Pope's wit but for the musical quality of her voice as she spoke his verses. "Do you know," she said one afternoon as we worked side by side cataloging a collection of ancient maps, "that Pope wrote some of his most beautiful lines about the fleeting nature of beauty and fame? Yet here we sit, surrounded by documents that have survived centuries, proving that some things do endure." I looked up from the map I was examining, a detailed rendering of our estate from my great-grandfather's time, and found her watching me with those expressive brown eyes. "What do you think endures?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing the edge of a manuscript with unconscious reverence. "Truth," she said finally. "Love. The things we do for others when no one is watching. Those leave marks that time cannot erase." Her words struck me with unexpected force, and I wondered if she was thinking of Martha, of the sacrifices her mother had made that would never be acknowledged or praised. The irony was not lost on me that we were surrounded by documents celebrating the deeds of powerful men, while the quiet heroism of women like Martha went unrecorded. As November faded into December, the weather grew colder, and I began timing my visits to coincide with the afternoons when pale winter sunlight would stream through the east wing windows, casting Lily in a golden glow that made her seem almost ethereal. She had grown more comfortable in my presence, no longer jumping to her feet when I entered the room, though she maintained the proper forms of address that reminded me constantly of the gulf between our stations. It was during one of these afternoon conversations that my father made an unexpected appearance in the library. I was explaining the genealogy displayed in a family tree dating back to the Norman Conquest when Lord Henry Ashford entered the room with his usual purposeful stride. "Edmund," he said, his voice carrying the tone of mild disapproval he often used when he found me engaged in what he considered frivolous pursuits, "I've been looking for you. We have matters to discuss." I stood immediately, acutely aware of how my casual posture beside Lily's desk must appear to his critical eye. "Of course, father. Miss Thornwick was just showing me some fascinating historical documents." My father's gaze moved to Lily, who had risen and dropped into a perfect curtsy, her eyes downcast in the manner expected of servants in the presence of their betters. But I saw the slight tension in her shoulders, the way her hands trembled almost imperceptibly as she clasped them before her. "Miss Thornwick," my father acknowledged with a brief nod. "I trust you are finding your duties satisfactory?" "Yes, my lord." "Thank you, my lord," she replied, her voice carefully neutral. "Excellent. Mr. Whitmore speaks highly of your work." He turned back to me. "Edmund, when you have finished here, please join me in my study. We have received an invitation that requires discussion." After he left, the atmosphere in the room had changed completely. Lily remained standing, no longer meeting my eyes, and I could feel the weight of social expectations settling between us like a physical barrier. "You should go," she said quietly. "Your father is waiting." "Lily," I began, then caught myself. I had been about to use her given name without the proper title, a familiarity that could be dangerous for both of us if overheard. She looked up at me then, and I saw in her expression a sadness that went far deeper than the momentary awkwardness of my father's interruption. "My lord," she said with emphasis on the formal address, "perhaps it would be better if you conducted your research during the morning hours, when Mr. Whitmore is available to assist you." The message was clear. She was asking me to stop visiting her, to end these conversations that had become the brightest part of my days. The rational part of my mind knew she was right. We had been growing too familiar, too comfortable with each other, and such familiarity could only lead to trouble for both of us. But the thought of not seeing her daily smile, of not hearing her thoughtful observations about the books we studied together, filled me with a desolation that surprised me with its intensity. "Of course," I said finally. "You're quite right. Good day, Miss Thornwick." I walked to my father's study with leaden steps, my mind reeling from the sudden shift in our dynamic. When I knocked on the heavy oak door, his voice called for me to enter, and I found him seated behind his massive desk, a letter spread before him. "Sit down, Edmund," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "We have much to discuss." I settled into the familiar chair where I had received countless lectures about duty, responsibility, and the obligations that came with our family name. The room was unchanged from my childhood, dark wood paneling, portraits of stern ancestors, and shelves lined with ledgers that recorded generations of careful stewardship of our lands and fortune. "I have received a most gratifying letter from the Duke of Pemberton," my father began, his tone suggesting this was news of considerable importance. "It seems his daughter, Lady Victoria, made quite an impression on you during your brief meeting at the Michaelmas celebration last month." I felt my stomach drop. Lady Victoria Pemberton was everything a duke's daughter should be: beautiful, accomplished, and possessed of a dowry that would make our family one of the wealthiest in England. She was also one of the most vapid, self-absorbed women I had ever met, capable of discussing nothing more stimulating than the latest fashions from London, or the romantic entanglements of her equally empty-headed friends. "I'm afraid I don't recall making any particular impression, father," I said carefully. "Modest as always," he replied with what he clearly thought was paternal pride. "The Duke has invited us to spend Christmas at Pemberton Hall, and he has made it quite clear that he would welcome a formal courtship between you and his daughter." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Father, surely such decisions are premature. I've barely spoken to Lady Victoria." "Which is precisely why the Christmas visit has been arranged," he said, leaning back in his chair with satisfaction. "You will have ample opportunity to become better acquainted. The Duke has also hinted that should things progress favorably, an engagement announcement might be appropriate for the spring season." I stared at him, my mind racing. An engagement to Lady Victoria would mean the end of everything: my freedom, my dreams of finding real love, and most devastatingly, any possibility of exploring these confusing but powerful feelings I had developed for Lily. "I'm not ready for marriage," I said, knowing even as I spoke that such an argument would carry little weight with my father. "Nonsense," he replied briskly. "You're 23 years old, university educated, and the heir to considerable holdings. It's past time you began thinking seriously about your responsibilities to this family. The Pemberton alliance would be advantageous in every respect." I wanted to argue, to tell him that I cared nothing for advantageous alliances, that I believed marriage should be based on mutual respect and affection rather than financial considerations. But the words died in my throat as I realized the full implications of what was happening. My father was not asking for my opinion. He was informing me of a decision that had already been made, probably negotiated in detail between him and the Duke over brandy and cigars while I remained blissfully unaware of their machinations. "When are we expected at Pemberton Hall?" I asked, my voice sounding hollow to my own ears. "We leave on the 22nd of December. The visit will extend through Twelfth Night, giving you and Lady Victoria ample time to reach an understanding." He folded the letter with satisfaction. "I'm very pleased, Edmund. This match will secure our family's position for generations to come." As I left his study, my mind was in turmoil. The thought of spending nearly 3 weeks in the company of Lady Victoria, pretending interest in her shallow conversation, while her father and mine plotted our future, filled me with despair. But worse still was the knowledge that when I returned to Ravenhall, if indeed I returned as an engaged man, any possibility of friendship with Lily would be permanently severed. That evening, I walked the corridors of our estate like a caged animal, unable to settle to any occupation. I found myself standing outside the library, knowing that Lily would have long since retired to her quarters, but somehow hoping for a glimpse of light under the door, some sign that she too was finding sleep elusive. The library was dark and silent, and as I stood there in the cold hallway, I made a decision that would change everything. I would tell her the truth, about who she really was, about my feelings for her, and about the impossible situation we faced. Whatever the consequences, she deserved to know that Martha's son had found Martha's daughter, and that against all reason and social convention, he had fallen desperately in love with her. The next morning arrived gray and bitter, with the first real snow of winter beginning to fall as I made my way to the east wing. I had barely slept, my mind churning with everything I needed to say to Lily, and when I found her at her usual desk, bent over a collection of medieval manuscripts, my heart began racing with nervous anticipation. "Miss Thornwick," I said softly, not wanting to startle her. She looked up, and I immediately noticed the shadows under her eyes, as if she too had spent a sleepless night. "My lord," she replied, rising quickly. "I thought we had agreed that morning hours were more appropriate for your research." "Please sit," I said, my voice more urgent than I intended. "There are things I must tell you, things that cannot wait." Something in my tone must have alarmed her, because she remained standing, her hands gripping the back of her chair. "My lord, if I have done something to displease you or your family—" "No," I interrupted. "Nothing like that. Please, Lily, just listen to me." I saw her flinch slightly at my use of her given name, but she didn't correct me this time. Instead, she sank slowly into her chair, her eyes never leaving my face. "I know who you are," I began, and watched as the color drained from her cheeks. "I know that Martha was not just a kind servant who helped you find employment. I know she was your mother." The silence that followed was deafening. Lily stared at me with an expression of such shock and fear that I immediately regretted my blunt approach. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "How long have you known?" "Since the day we met. I found Martha's journal hidden in the library. She wrote about you, about the impossible choice she made to give you a better life by concealing your relationship." I leaned forward, desperate to make her understand. "Lily, she loved you more than her own life. Every sacrifice she made was for you." Tears began to flow down her cheeks, and she pressed her hands to her mouth as if trying to hold back a sob. "I never told her," she whispered. "I never told her that I knew. From the time I was old enough to understand, I knew she was my mother, not my aunt. The way she looked at me, the way she touched my hair when she thought I wasn't paying attention. But I also knew that acknowledging it would destroy everything she had worked to build for both of us." The pain in her voice broke something inside me. I wanted nothing more than to take her in my arms, to comfort her as Martha would have done, but the social gulf between us made even that simple gesture impossible. "She knew," I said gently. "In her journal, she wrote that she could see the recognition in your eyes but was grateful you never spoke of it. She was so proud of the woman you had become, Lily. So proud of your intelligence, your kindness, your strength." "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, wiping at her tears with the back of her hand. "What purpose does it serve now that she's gone?" This was the moment I had dreaded, the point where I would have to reveal feelings that could only bring pain to both of us. "Because I needed you to know that you are not alone in your grief. Martha raised me from childhood, and I loved her as much as any son could love a mother. In a way, that makes us family, doesn't it?" She looked at me sharply, perhaps hearing something in my voice that I had tried to keep hidden. "Family," she repeated, and there was a bitter edge to the word. "Yes, I suppose it does. The son of the Lord and the bastard daughter of a servant. What a touching reunion." "Don't," I said fiercely. "Don't speak of yourself that way. Your birth circumstances mean nothing to me. What matters is who you are, your brilliant mind, your compassionate heart, the way you see beauty and meaning in everything around you." "My lord," she began, but I cut her off. "Edmund," I said. "My name is Edmund, and I wish you would use it." "I cannot," she replied, standing abruptly and moving toward the window where snow was now falling more heavily. "You know I cannot. Whatever you think you feel, whatever gratitude you bear toward Martha's memory, it cannot change what we are. I am a servant in your father's house, dependent on his goodwill for my very survival. What if that could change?" I asked, rising to follow her. "What if there were a way for us to be together without fear of social consequences?" She turned to face me, and I saw a flicker of something that might have been hope before it was quickly extinguished. "There is no such way. You know that as well as I do. Men of your station marry for alliance and advantage, not for love. And even if you were foolish enough to consider otherwise, your father would never permit it." "My father has already made his wishes clear," I said bitterly. "I am to be married to the Duke of Pemberton's daughter." The arrangements are being finalized as we speak. The words seemed to hit her like a physical blow. She gripped the window frame for support, her knuckles white with strain. Then why are you here? Why are you telling me these things when you know they can only cause pain? Because I needed you to know that if I had a choice, if I could follow my heart instead of duty, it would lead me to you. The words tumbled out before I could stop them, carrying with them all the longing and frustration I had been harboring. Because I am falling in love with you, Lily, and I cannot bear the thought of pretending otherwise. She closed her eyes as if my words caused her physical pain. Please don't say such things. Why? Because they're inappropriate? Because they threaten the careful order of our world? I moved closer, close enough to catch the faint scent of lavender that always seemed to surround her. Or because you feel them too? It doesn't matter what I feel, she said, her voice breaking. It cannot matter. You will marry Lady Victoria, as is expected of you, and I will continue to work in this library until I am old and gray, grateful for the privilege of serving your family. That is how our story ends, and no amount of wishing will change it. What if I refused? I asked desperately. What if I told my father that I would not marry for alliance, that I intended to choose my own bride? Then you would be disowned, stripped of your inheritance, and cast out with nothing. She replied immediately. And I would be dismissed without reference, blamed for corrupting the air with impossible dreams. We would both be ruined, and for what? A few months of happiness before reality destroyed us. Her practical assessment of our situation was devastating in its accuracy, but I couldn't accept it. There must be another way. There is no other way, she said firmly, moving away from me toward the door. And continuing these conversations will only make everything harder. Please, Edmund, I'm begging you. Let me go. The use of my given name, spoken with such desperate pleading, nearly broke my resolve. But as she reached for the door handle, I called her name once more. Lily, wait. She stopped but didn't turn around. What? If I leave for Pemberton Hall in 3 days and return as an engaged man, will you at least promise me one thing? What? She repeated, her voice barely audible. Promise me you'll stay at Ravenhall. Don't let my failure of courage drive you away. Martha wanted you to have a life here, to have security and purpose. Don't let my selfishness destroy that. She was quiet for so long that I began to think she wouldn't answer. Then, without turning around, she spoke. I promise. But in return, you must promise me something as well. Anything. Promise me you'll be a good husband to Lady Victoria. Whatever your feelings now, she deserves better than a man who wishes he were somewhere else. If you must marry for duty, at least try to find happiness in it. As my world crumbled around this impossible choice, I knew everything would change forever. If you want to see how this story unfolds, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what happens next, because what I discovered in Martha's final letter would alter not just my understanding of Lily's past, but the very foundation of everything I believed about love, duty, and the courage required to fight for what truly matters. The 3 weeks at Pemberton Hall passed like a waking nightmare. Lady Victoria proved to be exactly as insufferable as I remembered, prattling endlessly about gossip from London while her father and mine discussed wedding arrangements as if I were a prize bull being prepared for market. I played my part as the dutiful suitor, dancing with her at evening entertainments and listening to her massacre Beethoven on the pianoforte, all while my heart remained firmly anchored 40 miles away in a library where a woman with copper hair and intelligent eyes was cataloguing ancient documents. When I finally returned to Ravenhall on the 2nd of January, officially engaged to be married in the spring, I found that Lily had kept her promise. She was still there, still working quietly in the East Wing, though she had clearly taken great care to avoid any possibility of encountering me. For 2 weeks, I respected the distance she had created, throwing myself into estate business with my father and trying to convince myself that duty and responsibility were adequate substitutes for happiness. It was on a gray afternoon in mid-January, while sorting through papers in my father's study, that I made a discovery that changed everything. Hidden behind a collection of business correspondence, I found a second letter from Martha, this one addressed to me personally, and dated just days before her death. My hands trembled as I broke the wax seal and unfolded the familiar handwriting. What I read there made my blood run cold and my heart race with equal measure. My dearest Edmund, the letter began. If you are reading this, then God has seen fit to call me home, and I pray that you will forgive an old woman for the deceptions I have been forced to maintain. By now you may have discovered that Lily Thornwick is my daughter, though you do not yet know the full truth of her parentage. Her father was not the village blacksmith as I have allowed people to believe, but Lord James Thornwick, younger brother to the Earl of Westbrook. He was a gentleman of honor who loved me truly, but who died in a riding accident before he could make our union legitimate. Lily is not a bastard child, Edmund, but the natural daughter of nobility, with more right to gentle society than many who currently claim it. I have kept the proof of her parentage hidden all these years, waiting for the right moment to reveal it. That moment is now yours to choose. The letter went on to describe a hidden compartment in Martha's former room, where she had secreted away Lord James's letters declaring his intention to marry her, along with documents proving his acknowledgement of Lily as his daughter. There was even a small inheritance that he had left for any children he might have, currently held in trust by his solicitor in London. I sat in that study for an hour, reading and rereading Martha's words, my mind reeling with the implications. Lily was not the illegitimate daughter of a servant, but the acknowledged child of a younger son of an earl. While this didn't elevate her to the highest ranks of society, it made her entirely respectable as a match for someone of my station. More than respectable, it made our union not just possible, but appropriate. The hidden compartment was exactly where Martha had described it, behind a loose stone in the fireplace of her former quarters. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, were dozens of letters in a masculine hand, each one more passionate and devoted than the last. Lord James Thornwick had clearly been a man deeply in love, writing to Martha of his plans for their future, his joy at the news of their child, and his frustration with the legal complications that prevented their immediate marriage. But it was the final document that truly took my breath away, a formal acknowledgement of paternity, witnessed and sealed, declaring Lily to be his lawful daughter and heir to a modest but respectable income. This was not the desperate fantasy of a grieving mother, but legal proof that would stand up in any court in England. Armed with this knowledge, I knew what I had to do. The engagement to Lady Victoria had not yet been formally announced in London, and Christmas visits could be diplomatically explained away as a family friendship. If I acted quickly and decisively, I could still choose love over duty, heart over obligation. I found Lily in the library just after sunset, working alone by candlelight as snow fell softly outside the windows. She looked up when I entered, and I saw resignation in her eyes, as if she had been expecting this final, painful farewell. "I brought you something," I said, placing Martha's letter and Lord James's documents on her desk. She looked at the papers with confusion, then began to read. I watched as her expression shifted from puzzlement to shock to something that might have been hope. When she finished reading, she looked up at me with tears streaming down her face. "She kept all of this," she whispered. "All these years she had proof that I was legitimate, that my father loved us both, and she never said a word. She was protecting you," I said gently. "If Lord James had lived, you would have been raised as his acknowledged daughter. But as a child born out of wedlock to a woman with no powerful family to defend her, you were safer hidden away as a servant's daughter than exposed as a nobleman's bastard. But this changes everything," she said, her voice filled with wonder. This means that you are Miss Lily Thornwick, daughter of Lord James Thornwick, possessed of a respectable inheritance, and entirely suitable as a wife for the heir to Ravenhall." I knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in mine. "This means that I can offer you my heart, and my name without shame or scandal." She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her mind working through all the implications, all the ways this revelation transformed our impossible situation into something beautifully, miraculously possible. "What about Lady Victoria?" she asked. "What about your father's expectations?" "I will tell my father the truth, that I discovered I was already in love before the Pemberton engagement was suggested, and that the lady in question is entirely suitable as a match. As for Lady Victoria, she will recover from the disappointment quickly enough. I suspect she was no more enthusiastic about our engagement than I was." Lily laughed through her tears, a sound like music in the quiet library. "And you think your father will accept this?" "He'll have to," I said firmly. "Because I've discovered that some things matter more than duty and social advantage. I've learned that true nobility comes from character, not birthright, and that genuine love sees worth where society sees only status. You taught me that, Lily. You and Martha both." I stood and drew her to her feet, my hand still holding hers. "Miss Lily Thornwick, daughter of Lord James and the most remarkable woman I have ever known, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Her answer came not in words but in the way she stepped into my arms, finally closing the distance we had maintained for so long. When she lifted her face to mine and I kissed her there in the library where we had first met, surrounded by the books that had brought us together, I knew that Martha's final gift to us was not just proof of Lily's parentage, but the courage to choose love over convention. Our wedding took place 3 months later in the chapel at Ravenhall, with the entire estate in attendance. Lily wore her mother's pearl necklace and carried wildflowers from the kitchen garden, and when she walked down the aisle, I saw not just the woman I loved, but the fulfillment of Martha's deepest dreams for her daughter. As we exchanged vows in the presence of family and friends, I thought of Martha and how she had sacrificed everything to give her daughter a chance at happiness. She had known, somehow, that love would find a way, that the barriers between us were not insurmountable if we had the courage to look beyond them. Sometimes the greatest love stories begin in the most unexpected places, with a journal falling from a dusty shelf and the discovery that the woman who raised you left behind more than memories. She left behind a daughter who would teach you that true love doesn't recognize the artificial boundaries society tries to impose. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to hear more tales of love conquering all odds, because in the end, the greatest noble title anyone can claim is that of a person brave enough to follow their heart home.